Hello, listeners. Tess and I are back today after a break of a couple of months. We went to Paris. We did some other things. We're back at it now, and we are excited for the coming months of movies that we have on our schedule to watch and review and discuss with you guys. Today's movie I was really looking forward to. It was a movie I enjoyed tremendously when it first came out in 2013. It won a lot of awards, and it starred as its primary star a woman. And great special effects, a good story, exciting, everything you want in a film. So I was looking forward to it. And then the second watch was disappointing. And I think it's because the more we do this podcast, the more movies we see and discuss, the more great ideas I get from my daughter, the more influence she has on me, the less easy it is, for lack of a better way of saying this, to ignore how many movies really shortchange women, even when they're the main character. And in this movie, she is the main character. So let's get into it, and you'll find out why I am so disappointed today.
Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tess Adair, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Cuaron Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tess's mother, and also a writer. In the podcast today, we are discussing Gravity. Gravity was released in 2013, stars Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, with Ed Harris as the voice of Houston, directed by Alfonso Cuaron, written by Alfonso Cuaron and his son, Jonas Cuaron. I'm going to give you a brief plot summary. 3 astronauts are working outside in space on a spacewalk on repairs to the Space Shuttle Explorer when debris from a catastrophic Russian satellite explosion has caused a ripple effect among several other satellites, hurtling debris their way. It is sudden, and apparently in space, things move pretty quickly. The debris destroys the space shuttle, kills the 2 astronauts who are on board the shuttle, and one of the 3 working outside on their spacewalk. The 2 who survive are Matt Kowalski, played by George Clooney, and Ryan Stone, played by Sandra Bullock. They survive but are hurtled into space, tethered to each other, with only Kowalski in possession of an air pack, and there's probably a better word for that, for propulsion.
I think jetpack is generally the term.
Jetpack, that's it. Let me write that down so I don't forget jetpack. So he's the only one with a jetpack. He gets them to the International Space Station, which we'll refer to as the ISS going forward. But more space debris untethers him, and he floats away. Spoilers. While Stone finds a hatch and gets inside and saves herself, he is not saved.
He sacrifices himself.
He does. He sacrifices himself so she can get inside. Because he sees that's the only way that either one of them is going to survive.
The way that they've held on to the station at that point is just very tenuous, and he can see that his weight is going to pull them both off, so he detaches himself so that she won't be pulled away.
Yeah, she gets into the mobile unit, which has lost half of its wings, which is kind of an odd thing to see, but in space these things do actually have wings, not like the wings on a plane, but more like on a sailing ship, kind of. And eventually gets to the Chinese space station, which is on a trajectory, because of it has also been damaged. It's on a trajectory to re-enter Earth's atmosphere. So she gets into the escape pod and ejects the rest of the station to improve her chances of survival. She re-enters the atmosphere in this tiny little round pod, and she survives and lands back on Mother Earth.
Yeah.
And that is our story.
And that's also kind of the only part of the movie that takes place on Earth, is just the very end.
Yes, the very end, when she is, interestingly, and actually I think this is beautifully filmed, he could have forgotten this part, but when astronauts come in back to Earth from space, because they've been in zero gravity for so long, it is almost impossible for them to walk. So she's in the water, and that's kind of okay. She swims to the shore, though, and can barely stand up, has to force herself to crawl and then to stand up, just kind of like that first fish that crawled out of the ocean.
Apparently that was his intention. He wanted it to look
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
he wanted it to
Okay.
look like evolution. And that's also part of why she falls again and has to crawl, both because of that's what would happen to an astronaut, but also because he wanted to show her slowly, like that image that we all know of basically our ancestors slowly becoming bipedal. He wanted her to go through that
and
process.
It's very slow.
Yeah.
Beautifully done. I mean, it's probably one of the best scenes in the movie for a lot of reasons, but it's beautifully done. And actually, when we're talking about astronauts coming off of the space station, the guy who is now a senator in Arizona, who was married to Gabby Giffords, and I can't think of his name. He went up. He was an astronaut during the time that she was recovering from being shot. Mark is his first name. He's now a senator. But anyway, he went into space, onto the space station, was there for 6 months. And I'll never forget the image of him when he came back to Earth. And the space shuttles actually land on land. They don't drop them into the ocean the way the old-fashioned ships did, or the Apollo missions did. And they have to carry him out in a chair because it's just impossible. Just think of getting out of a pool after you've been in the water for 20 minutes. It's almost, your body is really heavy. Yeah. Her body's really heavy. Anyway, so she's crawling out of the water, and that's the end of the movie.
So this was the most Oscar-winning movie of the year 2013. It led both in nominations and in wins. I think it was 10 nominations, 7 wins, including Best Director for Alfonso Cuaron. I have mixed feelings about this movie. When I first saw it, I think my reaction, because I saw it in theaters. I actually saw it in a really nice big theater, so I think I had a really good experience of it, because it is a visually very impressive movie. I think my feeling was that was fine, and I never want to see it again. In part because the movie is tense throughout the whole thing. Like, it is only at the very end that she is safe and you can kind of let your breath out. There's like maybe 2 moments before that. I mean, like the very beginning of the movie, before anything bad has happened, it's not that bad. But even then, if you have any fear of space or small spaces at all, like the beginning of the movie, it starts with them out in space in what is already a very tenuous position. I don't know. I love science fiction, but I am very afraid of space. So I found it's just I think it's very hard to watch even the opening scene and not be keenly aware of the fact that life is not meant to exist out there.
It's a line in the beginning of the movie. One of them says, "Life in space is impossible."
Every moment of life out in space is hard fought for and incredibly tenuous. And the thing that happens is actually the catastrophic event is like actually pretty likely. I've heard it. I've heard it said that it's
very realistic.
Yeah, so basically what happens is like the Russians decide to bring down one of their satellites. The main characters think it's one of their old spy satellites, but obviously the Russians are never going to admit to that. And they have to do that by basically shooting it down. And they mess up very slightly, and instead of it falling straight down, it hits some other debris, and that causes a chain reaction in this whole cloud of debris, because just beyond our atmosphere, we have so many things in orbit, so many satellites, and
put there in such a short amount of time. I mean, really since the 50s, and yet it's just incredible how much crap is
and
up
because they are in orbit, it's a very delicate thing. They're constantly moving. The thing that keeps them in place is literally just a tenuous hold on gravity, and the slightest touch could cause them to lose their stable orbit, basically, and hurtle towards the Earth or something else. In this case, it basically just causes the debris to, I think it is basically a slowly decaying orbit, but it causes it to start like shooting around the Earth essentially, and it's this whole cloud.
Really? Yes.
And
yes. Really fast.
Yeah, really fast, because they basically calculate that they have 90 minutes in between collision with the field before it comes around again. So it's continuously moving around. So yeah, I remember, I think when this movie came out, there were a bunch of articles about how this is actually pretty likely, and it's crazy that this doesn't happen more often, considering how much stuff that we've shot up there, which is why, like, to bring it into the future, why it's, like, not a great thing that frickin' Elon Musk wants to shoot a bunch more satellites up there. And, you know, he's not the kind of person who does good research and, like, knows what he's doing when he does things. So having some billionaire idiot send a bunch more satellites up into space, not actually a good idea.
And he can't do it. His last 3 or 4 attempts to get a rocket off the ground have failed. And are we paying for that? I would say that's a question for another day. But something, but it is something to contemplate. But Clooney's character Kowalski says at one point, once they realize that all these satellites have been damaged because it's this ripple effect, he says, well, everybody just lost their Facebook transmission or their Facebook connection on Earth. So what we have to assume is that internet connection, and it does go through satellites. So it bounces up and back, and that's how we talk to each other. There are no cables under the sea. There actually may be one cable under the sea, but most of it is from here to England is through a satellite. And it happened so fast. You know, they get this communication from Houston, Ed Harris, telling them that they need to hurry up. The Russians are going to do this, and in case there are any problems, they need to get back inside the space shuttle and get this done. And she's struggling with something. She's there to repair something for them. She's a specialist. She's an MD, I think. They never say she's a medical doctor, but in the description of the movie, she's a medical scientist.
And she does say that she works in a hospital most of the time.
Yeah, but somehow she has also become an engineer that they need in this particular situation.
Yeah, she's trying to install this thing, and it's something that she invented, which is why she's the one installing it. I mentioned to a friend that I had rewatched this movie, and I was complaining that I don't think this movie is science fiction. I don't think this movie qualifies personally, and apparently the director agrees with me. He doesn't consider it a science fiction movie either. And my friend was saying, well, the one thing about it that's science fiction is the fact that Sandra Bullock's character is going up to install this herself instead of just training an astronaut to install it. And I was like, that's a good point. That is one of the most unrealistic things about it.
And assuming it wasn't something that needed to be repaired right away, because she had to go through 6 months of training. And you see this happen, that you can tell that Clooney and Sharif, before he dies, are much more highly experienced astronauts. She is not. And so she, you know, one of the serious problems that she faces is after they are, it's just 2 of them and they're tethered to each other, maybe even before she finds him, is she's breathing so fast. Because she forgets, even though she's a medical doctor, she forgets that she needs to slow down her breathing to preserve oxygen. So by the time she gets to him, she's down to 8%.
It probably is a matter of training, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a matter of forgetting, because she's hyperventilating, which is not something that most humans can consciously stop themselves from doing, you know? Maybe if she had more training of controlling her breath, but she's not an astronaut.
I thought she did have the training, because she
has some training, but not the same amount as them.
Yeah, probably not. And not in 6 months. I mean, they've been training for years. So, So you're right. That's a science fiction part of it. Why would they send somebody up into space to do a spacewalk with so little training? I mean, you know, you can go in a space shuttle, maybe, the way those women did for their 9-minute flight into space and back, without a whole lot of training. But if you're going to walk outside your spaceship, 6 months doesn't seem realistic
I
to me.
assume part of the reason from a script point of view is that they wanted her character to be the least experienced astronaut on the team, because she has to spend so much of the movie figuring it out on her own, and it is figuring it out, because a lot of it she has to go into 2 separate shuttles. She has to go to the shuttle in the ISS to get over to the Chinese station, and then in the Chinese station she has to go into another shuttle. And I thought that was a really interesting moment, because they reveal, and I don't know if this is true, but I suspect it might be, that the Chinese shuttle is actually the same as the ISS shuttle. It's just in Chinese, but all of the buttons are in the same position so that astronauts can use them if they need to.
And it should be noted, too, that when she gets onto the ISS, she has to go outside and walk in space again to fix something that's got caught up. All those tether lines.
The parachute deployed.
Yeah, the parachute. So the use of tethers in this movie is fascinating, because they're tethered to each other. and she is tethered to the ship, and that saves their lives, and yet it puts her life at risk too, because all those tether lines that are attached to the, what you call it?
The parachute.
Thank you. The parachute almost kill her, and she has to go back outside again, and then once again she's tethered to the ship. And then interestingly, they are tethered to each other when they get to the ISS, or when when they see it's in the distance, and he's telling her to slow her breathing so she doesn't use her oxygen up, so he can use his jetpack to propel them to back to the ISS. And then when she is doing her second spacewalk, where everybody else is gone, she's on the little, it's like a weather vane fly thing. I mean, it's like she disattaches from the ISS, and maybe it is a shuttle. I'm not sure if it's some kind of flying vehicle, but it doesn't look like it's a shuttle because it's the little round ball, but it's got the flying wings on it. The flapping.
Are you talking
wings.
about when she's going from the ISS to the Chinese shuttle, or later?
Right, before she starts that.
There's a capsule, so she ejects 2/3 of the shuttle, right?
I think so, yes.
The way a lot of our shuttles work is that they eject parts of themselves to keep going, so that the main important part doesn't have as much weight on it, and that's basically what she ends up having to do, is eject the front and back of the shuttle so that it's just the pod in the middle.
And then she has to do the spacewalk again. She's tethered there, but then to get to, where is it? Is it the Chinese thing where she has to use the fire extinguisher to propel herself, which is also another science fiction-y thing?
She gets that on the ISS. So when she gets onto the ISS, she flies past this tiny little thing that's on fire. And as she's trying to figure out what her next move is and kind of taking a breath, half of the ISS catches on fire, basically. That's where she gets the fire extinguisher, and then she takes it onto the shuttle with her, and then she uses it later on to propel herself onto the Chinese station.
Space shuttle.
Yeah.
Okay. Or no, station. It's the station.
Well, I think it might be.
Okay, so she.
It might be that she's getting into the shuttle, because I think what happens at that moment is by the time she gets to the Chinese station, I think the debris field is happening again. So she, I think she gets knocked off course and then uses the thing to get herself close to where she needs to be. But I don't think she really goes on to the Chinese station. She pretty much goes directly into the shuttle.
She does, and then she has to almost immediately detach from it in the escape. So she detaches inside a space pod, a round pod, twice. And in between, when she's in the first pod, she has to leave the pod, and she runs out of fuel.
Yeah, the first pod doesn't have fuel, and then she realizes through a hallucination that landing and taking off are the same. So she uses the landing the landing protocol to propel herself over. So I'm not sure if that means that there was extra fuel, or if it was just the process of, because sometimes the process of separating actually does give you momentum.
But it's still not quite enough to get her to the Chinese space station.
At the point that she's gets into the first shuttle and realizes that she's out of fuel, she basically temporarily gives up and decides that she's going to die. And then she has a hallucination of George Clooney showing up again, somehow having not drifted off into space.
And pulling out his vodka.
Yeah, and climbing in and talking to her. And it's through that hallucinated conversation with him that she figures this out.
And that was actually, I remember seeing it when I saw it the first time, thinking, he survived.
Because it's a Hollywood movie.
And then she turns her head away from him, and when she turns back, he's gone.
Yeah.
So we know it's a hallucination or dream or something, yeah. But then when she uses the fire extinguisher to basically shoot herself to... I'm sorry. As I was watching it, she's laughing. She's actually being funny. And the only time in the film we see her being funny is when she's doing that, and she's cracking jokes she knows that it's impossible. She's not going to get to the Chinese space station with this fire extinguisher as her propulsion, and yet she does. So that's also a science fiction-y thing.
I think that's a Hollywood thing. I don't think there's anything sci-fi about that. The reason that I don't really consider this film sci-fi is that none of the technology in this film is technology that we don't already have. There are moments where she survives in a way that is incredibly improbable, But I don't think that makes a film
Mm-hmm.
science fiction. Do we think Die Hard is a science fiction film? Do we think Indiana Jones is a science fiction film? There are so many movies where improbable things happen that we don't consider science fiction. And I don't think that this...
That's a great comparison. I love that. That's a great comparison. Because one of the criticisms that the person I went to see this movie with the first time had was that none of this could have happened. She could not have survived the way she did. And yet, in Die Hard, but he was a man.
Yeah.
He was a man, so it makes it less improbable.
I do think there are unfortunately a lot of men out there who feel that way. Like this is a big issue with the Star Wars fan base. They think that all of the crazy stuff that happens is fine as long as it's Luke Skywalker doing it, but as soon as it's a young woman instead of a young man, all of a sudden that's crazy. She would never be able to do that. This is so improbable. No one can believe this. I do think that's a real thing. But the point that I'm trying to make is, and this kind of just gets back to how I feel about this film. I do think this is a good film. And a part of me is very happy that it won so many Oscars because sci-fi is generally so maligned by the Academy. And so the fact that people consider this a sci-fi movie and then it won a bunch of Oscars, that in theory is a good thing, except that I don't really think this is a sci-fi movie. And B, I don't really care about the Oscars. But I do think this is a well-made movie. I don't like it as much as I think I should. And maybe that's partly because it was sold to me as a science fiction movie. So I went in thinking, okay, this is going to be a sci-fi movie. I love sci-fi. And then I watched it and I was like, this is fine. I think you're right. It's a thriller. There are moments where I think it's almost a horror movie. Like it's very tense, the feeling of tension. And for me, I do think the idea of being in space is kind of horrifying if we're going to treat it seriously and not all be, Star Trek where we have magic technology that just keeps you safe all the time. If we're treating the concept of space realistically, I do think it's very easy for that to be horrifying. It is horrifying.
Well, and I'll tell you, I had the same reaction. I wasn't both times. I mean, the first time I just loved it because she survived. She wins in the end, and that's why I liked it the first time. This time, now that I knew what was going to happen, I could actually watch the film for what it was, And I think you're right. It's in the science fiction genre somewhat, but it's also an adventure and a thriller. But the reason I was disappointed, and I mentioned this in the intro, is that this woman has no character development. This is Sandra Bullock, and you have wasted her in this film. Clooney has more character, more personality, more character development in the 5 minutes he's on screen than she does in the entire hour and a half that she's on screen. And just compare this to The Martian, for example.
Never seen it.
Oh, okay. Similar kind of film. Matt Damon gets stranded on Mars. And they cannot return to get him for a certain, I don't remember how long it was, a couple of years. He has to keep himself alive for them to justify, first of all, for the timeline, because you just can't just build a rocket ship overnight. They have to build one, and then it's like a 6-month journey. So there's a lot of time that he has to keep himself alive, and he does it by building a shelter, by using the technology that was on the ship to make gardens. I don't even remember. Yeah. It's very detailed. Every time there's something new he has to learn to keep himself alive, he learns it. And you see him training himself and learning things and experimenting. And it's basically a one-person movie. There are people on Earth, who are communicating with him periodically to find out if he's still alive or not. And they're building the ship to come get him. He is fully fleshed out as a character. It's the same kind of story. She is on her own. She is trying to survive. And we don't know anything about her except that she's a mother and her child died.
Yeah.
That's all we know. Was she married? Does she have siblings?
Yeah.
Does she have a family? We know she's from Illinois. We don't know anything about this woman, but we know Kowalski's life story. That was disappointing.
I don't know that we know Kowalski's life story. I feel like the difference is Kowalski has a sense of humor, and so he feels much more personable to us. And we do know that he's about to retire. That he's an astronaut. And this is his last mission, and he's hoping to defeat Anatoly's spacewalk record. So I do think we get a little bit more personal details about him for sure. And there is a big difference when a character is allowed to be kind of funny. It makes them feel a lot more real to us. And she's just basically keeping a panic attack in check for the first part of the movie, and then is basically having a continuous panic attack for the rest of the movie. And that's not nothing.
The entire time.
When I first saw the movie, I remember somehow I guessed that she had a dead child before they revealed it. And it just annoyed me so much. And I think I couldn't put my finger on why. But now I think you've kind of basically just said it. I think it's because they gave her a dead child in lieu of giving her a personality.
Yeah, in lieu of anything else.
Yeah, the idea that she is a mother who lost her child, it's like we've decided that that's all she needs, that we don't need anything more from her, that's enough personality, and it's not. It feels very empty, especially because the child is not a character. We don't even get a flashback to the kid. It's literally just this fact about her.
No pictures?
It basically feels like it's there to explain why she gives up when things seem hopeless. And first of all, I don't think I needed that. I don't think someone needs to have lost a child to feel like they would rather go to sleep and die than like face the horrors and die. You know, that's basically the decision that she thinks she's making before she figures out that there is an option. I can either fight this and die in horror, or I can turn down my oxygen and go to sleep and die peacefully. I think a lot of people would make that choice, especially if they can't think of anything else. I don't think you need to have lost a child to make that choice. So that's a little bit annoying. I think also, now that you've compared this to The Martian, which I haven't seen, but I do know about, I think the timeline, the internal timeline to the movie is a big difference there. This movie basically takes place over roughly 3 hours. Like the runtime is only an hour and a half, but essentially we get the first collision with the debris, and then we get 2 more collisions with the debris, and we know that it's 90 minutes in between each. So basically this movie takes place over 3 to 4 hours, because there's a little bit before and a little bit after. There's not a lot that we can see about a character during that time, whereas The Martian, you do see him for at least, I don't know the timeline, but I do think it's like months to maybe a year or two.
Oh, it's several years.
He's
several years on Mars by himself.
So that's a lot more time to kind of get to know this character and like show who they are, and it's a lot more contemplative time. You know, she doesn't get any time where she's not trying to survive. Contrary to what those weird old philosophers say, you don't actually learn that much about a person when they're about to die.
No, they're too busy trying to survive.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Kowalski doesn't know anything about her. I don't know anything about how NASA operates, but I would assume that if you inject a new person into a limited society of 5 people, that you're going to give them a little bit of background on this person. And he does not know that she has lost a child. He has to ask her where she's from. He doesn't even know where she's from. In fact, he says, where do you park your car on planet Earth? Because she doesn't understand what he's asking. And he's trying to calm her down, but he knows nothing about her. They have put this woman on the space shuttle with them to save their space shuttle, and they don't know anything about her. How probable is that? I think there's a reason for it. I think Cuaron is deliberate in not telling us anything about her. I'm not sure why, but Kowalski doesn't even know.
I have a guess, which is basically that she's kind of meant to be an every person. You know, I mean, usually the term is everyman, but obviously she's a woman. But, you know, this is often a thing in like YA novels, but I think it also applies here because I think this whole movie is meant to be a metaphor for the human instinct for survival and perseverance in the face of all odds. And I think to that end, she is basically meant to be a stand-in for the audience to a certain extent. You know, you're meant to be able to identify with her, and therefore she has been stripped of all personality. And unfortunately, I do think this happens much more often to female protagonists than to male protagonists. I think male protagonists are often allowed to be a little bit more specific, even when they're supposed to be an everyman type of character. Which is not to say that I think Alfonso Cuaron is a sexist. I don't want to, make any sweeping statement like that. And I actually like him a lot as a director.
I do too.
One of our previous episodes was about Children of Men, which was directed by him, and that is one of my favorite movies.
Absolutely,
of all
too.
time. And that one's also like a very stark and kind of a dark movie. It also has a protagonist who lost a child. But the thing is, he has so much more of a life than this character does. Even though his life is kind of sad and lonely in a lot of ways, we get to see him interact so much more with his life. And I don't even necessarily think it's a weakness of this film, because I don't think this film is trying to do the same thing. But for me, that's part of why I don't like it as much.
He's interacting with the world around him. He's observing. We see his point of view as he travels through the countryside and to see different friends. And even when he's in the city, when he's going to the bar, we see his world. We don't see their world. Now, the other people that are on the space shuttle, presumably, they're professional astronauts. This is their world. Kowalski, this is his world. It's not her world. We don't see her world. We don't see it in flashbacks. We don't see anything. And he is a mother. Cuaron, I haven't seen that many of his films, but both of these two films are about motherhood to some degree. And that's not all women are. Why couldn't she have why couldn't she have lost her husband? Now, I think there's a reason for that. The instinct to survive can leave us when the most terrible thing happens to us. And the most terrible thing that can happen to a human being is to lose a child.
Well, to a person with a child, that's the most terrible thing that can happen to them.
Can you think of a worse thing?
If you've never had a child, you can't lose a child. So that's not the most terrible thing that can happen to someone who's never had a child.
But if you've never had a child, what is the most horrible thing that can happen to you?
Losing your spouse, losing your family, losing anyone else. I mean, Battlestar Galactica. You could have your whole civilization be destroyed.
That would be the only thing, yes.
Or, okay, I mean, not to get too political, but imagine you were a Palestinian in Gaza right now. That's the worst thing that can happen to someone.
We'll have to agree to disagree on this, but from my perspective, he puts this person who has experienced the worst loss you can experience into a situation where she has to decide if she wants to survive. And that's true of our main character in Children of Men as well. He also has to decide if he wants to survive. And at the end, he does decide that he really does want to live. And she knows after that hallucination or whatever, it's something she hears.
Are you talking about the conversation with the Inuk guy on the radio?
Yeah. So there's a scene where she's hearing a baby sing, and I don't remember what it is. Maybe you can remind me of it. But in that moment, I think she decides not to give up. Do you remember what the scene was?
She's trying to reach Houston on the communication thing on the radio, and she instead reaches an Inuk fisherman named Anengak, who is playing with his baby. But that's not actually the moment that she decides to live. That's the moment that she decides to die.
Oh, I don't think so.
Yes, it is. That's the moment that she decides she's just going to listen to them. She tells him to make the baby cry again, and then he starts having the dogs bark, and that's when she starts turning down her oxygen so that she can die listening to that. And then a moment later is when George Clooney mysteriously reappears, and then she realizes that she has one more shot.
So you think it's a hallucination of Clooney that makes her want to live?
I don't actually think it's that it makes her want to live. I think it's just that is her mind working out what her other options are. It's the realization that there is another option that makes her try again.
Well, when I first saw the movie, I thought one of the big themes was the instinct for survival, that humans really have a strong instinct to survive, and that she proves that through extraordinary measures. She has to read stuff, to figure out how to make things work on the spaceship, and then when she's on the Chinese spaceship, she has to try and figure it out from memory because she can't read it, but she does it. She uses skills she didn't even realize she had, and I think that has to come from somewhere. But she doesn't strike me as somebody, when they're on the spacewalk, who has a lot of... When the catastrophe first happens, she's doing what she's told to do. She's not really coming up with her own ideas about how to survive.
I do think she goes on an arc from being more passive to being more active, but she doesn't really do that until after George Clooney is gone. While George Clooney is there, I guess I should call him by his character's name, Kowalski. While Kowalski is there, he is the one who keeps kind of pushing her. The feeling that I got was that he's just a guy who knows that you kind of need to have a bit of hope to keep being active, and it feels like she's not thinking about what's going to get her through to the next moment. I don't know, maybe she hasn't since her child died. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. We're stumbling through this because we don't know anything about her.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the first thing about this woman. There's no character development here. So So what is her motivation to survive? We don't know.
Yeah. I think this movie is well made. I'm just not that interested in it. It's well made, and I think it was a very difficult movie to make. Something like 80 of the 90 minutes of screen time have special effects in them. They had to build this thing that they called the light box to film most of Sandra Bullock's stuff, and in order to kind of recreate space. Basically, they had to build this thing so they could film her.
How did they do the gravity things?
I don't know about the gravity things, but they created this thing that they called the light box that had thousands of LED bulbs to simulate outer space, and she had to like climb into it and stay into it for 10 hours a day every day because it was so hard to get in and out of, and that's where they did most of her shots. They did simulate zero-G, but a lot of it is also just computer generated. All of the shots had to be so specific planned that it took them like 4 years to plan everything, to do pre-production basically. So it was a very difficult film to make, and I do think that it was an achievement from that front, but I also just think it's my least favorite of Cuaron's movies, and that's kind of interesting because I feel like there are a number of best director wins where whoever the director is, I don't think of that as his best film. I mean, Guillermo del Toro, I feel like this very clearly happened with him, where I think Guillermo del Toro's best movie by far is Pan's Labyrinth, but he didn't win the Oscar for that. He won the Oscar for Shape of Water, which I honestly thought was a terrible film. I like Guillermo del Toro, but I feel like his films are pretty hit or miss with me, and I thought Shape of Water was a big miss for me. Small spoiler alert, but I don't like any movie where they kill a cat for no good reason, so yeah, I hated Shape of Water, but I think Pan's Labyrinth was a really good movie. I feel like Guillermo del Toro partly won the Oscar for Shape of Water because he's a well-respected director who hadn't won an Oscar yet. So I feel like that happens sometimes where they toss an Oscar for Best Director at a director because he should have won it for a different movie, but at the time he wasn't as well known or didn't have as much clout or whatever. I don't think that's necessarily what's happening here. I actually think what's happening with Gravity is, I do think at the time that it was made, Alfonso Cuaron was a bigger name than he had been in the past, but I also think this movie was like tailor-made to appeal to the Academy, both because it is a technological marvel and also because so much of it relies on a single actor's performance, Sandra Bullock's performance. Mm-hmm. And she was also a well-loved actor at the time. I mean, she still is, but she was kind of like in her heyday. I think this was one of the years where she was nominated for an Oscar for like several years running. So yeah, I feel like this movie was tailor-made to appeal to the Oscars, and maybe that's part of why I don't like it that much. I don't really care how much of a technological marvel something is or how much of a single individual performance it relies on. These are things that have been noted to appeal to the Academy, but I don't think these things make a film good. I think this film is well made and incredibly limited in scope, and because of that, I find it kind of boring. It's not really about anything but survival, and it's very about survival, so that's what they wanted to do, and that's what they did, so it's a success in that way. But I do kind of feel the same way that I felt the first time through, which is like, I'm glad I saw it. I don't really ever want to see it again.
Yeah, I don't think I ever want to see it again either. I think the first time I saw it, though, I remember thinking it was a lot more improbable than the second time I saw it. And by that I mean, as I was watching it the second time, I kept waiting for there to be fantastical scenes that nobody could possibly survive, and yet she does, because that's the impression I got the first time I saw it. But this time I didn't really see anything that wasn't at least slightly possible.
Yeah.
And where there's possibility, there's probability. And it's a close call. Every time she survives, and there's like 2 or 3 of these bumps, it's a close call. And as you were talking, I started thinking about what it is that makes her wake up to wanting to live again. And I really had thought it was the baby and the dog and the guy who she couldn't communicate with because he was speaking in Greenlandish. Because apparently that's what the language is. I had never heard that before. But maybe it was that combined with the Clooney hallucination hallucination, because I do think tethering in the movie is a theme. And by that, I mean the connections, how we are tethered to people, how we are tethered to the land, how we're tethered to the earth, to our worlds. I would probably add, from my perspective, why we should never leave. We should never go to space. But there are people who want to explore, whatever, more power to them. I'm never going to leave the earth. But so that tethering theme kind of wakes up after she's inside and she's lost all the tethers, and the person who was helping her the most is gone. She hears the human voices. And here's another point. They've had no communication with Houston. Once Sharif, the third person who was outside, gets killed and the shuttle is pretty much destroyed and the people inside it are killed, they also lose all communication with Houston. So there are no human voices coming to her at all. So when she hears this guy in Greenland, even though she can't make out what he's saying, she really enjoys hearing his voice. And so maybe that's why she conjures Kowalski back. Maybe that's her brain doing it. But the thing that keeps us wanting to be alive, I think, is our connections, which in space talk is our tethering to whatever it is we're tethered to. So, and I think that's why that's a turning point for her. And you see that on her face when she's crawling on the beach, that she's really glad she made it. So we could do visuals for a minute. Do you want to do that? Any of the filmmaking stuff?
It's impressive in that there's a lot of wide shots that really show you how endless space is, but I also find it kind of boring to look at. It's very realistic, so I don't feel like there's a lot of artistic flair, except for the fact that there are a lot of long one-shots, because Cuaron does really like a long one-shot, and there's some really long ones in here for sure. And then there's like the one
with the
shot...
sun coming up.
Yeah, there's some shots of like the Earth with the sun coming up. And then there's the one shot where she gets into the ISS, and during her like one moment of downtime, she takes off the suit and then kind of floats in a sort of fetal position for a little bit.
That's a great scene.
I mean, yeah,
really.
But I also just like, even as I'm talking about it, I'm like, yeah, sure. The movie's about life, so she's a fetus again. Okay.
But still, visually, it was beautiful, I thought.
Did you have stuff you wanted to say about the visuals?
So the visual that I remember is when they are tethered together and he's using his jetpack and they're headed towards the ISS, and you see the line that's connecting them floating across the planet, and it looks fiery. The Earth looks fiery, and I kept fiery, I guess some people pronounce it, and I kept looking at it thinking, why? Oh, those are lights in cities, and it's nighttime on that side of the planet. And for some reason, the planet looks brighter from a distance, from pictures I've seen, when it's nighttime and people's lights are on. But that line floating across the planet, half in space and half across the Earth, I thought that was beautiful. When he talks about the sun coming up, and actually Kowalski describes something that we don't see, and he said, the sunshine on the Ganges. He's saying that he can see it. But my problem with these space shots is that when the sun is coming around the Earth, it's not really a sunset or a sunrise. It's the Earth rotating. I mean, it's the rotating around the sun, and the spaceship is rotating in orbit around the Earth. So it's not really. They try to make it poetic, I guess. And I don't see the poetry in it when all I can see is the science. That's just
what would
me.
you call it if you wouldn't call it a sunset?
The light is streaming around the planet, but if it's sunrise in one place, it's not going to be sunrise in another. Sunrise is where you are on the planet.
They have a position in relation to the planet,
but they're moving constantly. Or maybe the ISS isn't moving, but the space shuttle.
But there are still times when they are intersecting with a moment of sunset or sunrise, because they are moving, but so is the Earth.
That's what he's saying. I don't understand how that's possible. So, although it was beautiful, but again, it's created by computers, CGI. But because these things are constantly in motion, I'm not sure I understand how you see a sunrise from space. That's my point. That's my question.
It's just not going to look the same as it looks from Earth, because you're much higher up.
But the sunshine on the Ganges, I'm not sure about that. I think he's just being...
That might be poetic license. I don't really know how big the Ganges is, or if it's visible from space. That might be him being poetic.
There are a couple audio things too. First, hearing the human voices in Greenland, and Ed Harris's voice coming from Mission Control. So there's audio stuff in here. And it's funny that they use Ed Harris, because I'm pretty sure that on the in the Tom Hanks movie. Was it Steven? No. It's Opie directed
Ron
Apollo 11. Ron Howard. Ed Harris played Mission Control in that movie too. So I'm guessing that this was a nod to that. At some point, she says to Kowalski, "Tell her I'm not quitting." Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. She's saying, like, if he dies and meets her daughter, to tell her daughter that she's not quitting.
Okay. All right. There you go.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. I wrote it down because I thought it was interesting, and then I completely forgot what the context was, so thank you.
Yeah. I think maybe that's why I'm not that into this movie. I just feel like so much of that kind of stuff, talking about grief in these big, grand ways, it feels really cheesy to me. And as someone who has now, like, experienced the loss of my father, it also doesn't ring that true. I feel like grief is always individual to the person, and a lot of these times when these movies try to talk about grief and survival in the abstract, it just ends up becoming this kind of cheesy one-for-all sort of thing that just has never really worked for me and continues to not work for me. This does not feel like an individual's grief. This feels like the concept of grief for a dead child. And I've always kind of hated movies that are about, or stories that are about people who have quote-unquote lost a child. I think because it is meant to be this stand-in for terrible, terrible grief, and it just always comes off as they're just trying to tug on your heartstrings, because who doesn't feel sad about the concept of a dead child? And like, yeah, that is very sad, but I would much rather have an actual individual story about that from someone who has actually experienced it, rather than trying to create this like universal understanding. Because I feel like when you try to make it universal, it loses all of its power.
That's a good point. And actually, a couple questions about her losing her child. She tells the story in 2 or 3 sentences and seems very... It's a very bland story. I mean, it's horrible. The kid was playing on the playground, fell, hit her head, and she died. And that was it. And that's all she says about it. We don't know. And we know the daughter was 4. We don't know how long it's been. We don't know how many years it's been. You know, she's maybe 40-ish, I guess. She's supposed to be 40 or so in the film. So presumably it hasn't been that long. But it's been long enough for her to train for this mission and get to space. So that was a question I was wondering. How long has it been? Because not that kind of grief really ever completely goes away. It stays with you, but it's not, you're not conscious of it at every living moment, which seems to be where she's at. But we don't know. It's another thing. We don't know anything about her. You know, we don't know, was she married?
Yeah.
We just don't know anything about her. We don't know what kind of doctor she was before. That's my biggest problem with this film. I do think they kind of fluff off the whole grief thing. They insert it like it's a comma and, oh, well, she lost a child. They want you to think it's really big, but we don't get that from her.
Yeah.
We don't see the grief on her face. We don't hear it in her voice when she's telling him the story. It lacks a real depiction.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems of making it grief for a small child is that it is harder to make that more specific, because a child who has only lived to 4 years old, they've done child things. Any kind of story that you tell about them, that's just a child. Whereas if it had been, say, a romantic partner, she could have told the story of how they met, or, you know, any adventure that they went on together, because adults are fully formed people and have very unique individual experiences, whereas children who are that young have mostly had generic child experiences. They're just starting to form their personalities. And then also because the movie is so breakneck pace apart from that, it's so tense the whole time, there's very little time for her to say anything more about her child. So maybe if it had been a grief for a fully formed adult, maybe we could have learned a little bit more about that person and about their life together.
Yeah.
It's a child. It's a really young child. So she is child and she is mother. And that is their relationship. It's very archetypical.
And that's all we know.
Yeah.
That's all we know. We don't know the child's name. We don't know anything about... And when it's a loss of a child like that, it's a loss of potential, of what her potential life would be like. And that grief is different from the kind you would have if your child was an adult. So it is different. We just don't know. If she's going to be the only person in this movie, which essentially she is, why don't we know more about her? Why didn't he flesh out her personality more, or her character more? I just don't understand that.
All right, hot takes?
Yeah, hot takes. Go ahead.
I mean, I think I've pretty much already said it. My hot take is that this movie is not science fiction. It's not. There's nothing There's nothing in this movie that is not technology that we already had at the time. There are things in this movie that are improbable, but that does not make science fiction.
Okay, so hot takes for me. I would like to see more Cuaron films. I think I've only seen the 2.
You've seen more than 2.
Okay, what have I seen?
First of all, he directed the 3rd Harry Potter movie, Harry Potter and the Prisoner
of
Azkaban.
I did not remember that. Okay.
And secondly,
that was my favorite, so.
He directed one of my favorite childhood films, A Little Princess.
You mentioned that a couple weeks ago. Okay, yeah. That was a very well-made film.
Yes, it was.
Very well-made film. So I guess my only other hot take is bringing it back to my first commentary about how this podcast has opened my eyes, and you have done that, to how poorly women are represented in films. And the last couple of weeks, about a month ago, I guess, the New York Times produced a list that its movie critics had created of the 100 best films of the 21st century. It's 25 years so far. But they got a lot of complaints from readers who said, the critics don't represent us, blah, blah, blah. So they did a readers poll, and they came up with a list of the 100 best films as, their readers thought. And in the top 10 list, there are only 2 films that had women as the focus or the main character of the movie. 3 if you include Spirited Away. And Spirited Away did have a female, but it was a child. So Mulholland Drive, which is probably the best film about women that I can remember. A lot of people think that the Thelma and Louise film was a great women's film, but I hate the ending. You can't have, was it directed by a man? It must have been. But really, you have these 2 great women characters, and the only thing you can do to save them is to kill them off. We need to talk about this movie at some point because it still pisses me off to this day. And that's not the way you end a film about 2 women who have survived and succeeded, and it's just not. It's misogynistic.
Yeah.
You kill them off. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's off topic. But Mulholland Drive is in there, and then Mad Max Fury Road, which I have not yet seen. And we've talked about possibly doing that in the podcast sometime soon. I would really like to watch that one. So, but all the other movies are either ensemble groups where there may be 1 or 2 women, but they're not prominent, or they're not in a main character type role. And then 5 or 6 that are focused on men, are men's stories. The best example is No Country for Old Men.
Yeah,
I pulled each one of these films up to see what Google would say about them. And there's the 6 main characters. 6 main characters in that movie. You had to scroll through 6 of them to find a woman.
Yeah.
6 are all men. The Dark Knight is in the top 10.
I do not understand the hold that
I
movie
do
has
not
over
understand.
people.
There are so many. The Parasite. I've not seen that one, but I read the summary of the story, and I'm like, this sounds horrible.
Yeah, I hated it.
You hated it, right?
I've seen it. I hated it. I understand why people like it. I think people interpret it as being very pro-working class, and I do think it's trying to be, but I also think that at the turning point of the film, the thing that goes wrong is working class people turning on each other in a way that's really stupid and makes everyone involved look like an idiot, and so I did not like it. It also, spoilers for Parasite, I guess I'll have to put this in the warning. It also, kills off the young woman for no frickin' reason. The dudes all live, but the young woman gets stabbed to death right at the end for no random act of violence. I hate that movie. I frickin' hate it.
Yeah, and then the other movies, The Social Network, which is the most depressing movie about men I've seen it in a long time. It really depicts them as being terrible, terrible creatures. There are hardly any women in this film, and the ones that are in it, and it's been a long time since I saw it, but the women that are in it are just bed partners. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I've never seen that. It does have a man and a woman, and it's Kate Winslet.
Yeah, I have seen that one. I actually think maybe we should do that one at some point. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I do remember enjoying it. But it is definitely from the man's perspective. It's about a relationship.
There you go.
That's ending. So it is kind of about both of them, but I do think it's more from his perspective than hers.
And there will be blood. Now tell me there's a woman in that movie, because there's not. It's
couldn't tell you. Never seen it. Never will.
Never will. And this reminds me that gangsters and cowboy movies were pretty much the majority of movies that have been made over the last 50 or 60 years have been gangster movies or cowboy movies over and over and over again. Same plot line, same kind of characters. There are exceptions. The Wild Bunch was a pretty good movie, but it was all men. There were no women in that. Seven Samurai, great film. no women. So it's like, even the films that I love, that I think are great films, a lot of times there are no women in them. You know, I love the first Godfather movie. The women have pretty much no agency, nothing in this film. And in Apocalypse Now, are there any women in that other than the dancers? And we love that movie.
In the extended version, there's some topless French women, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
So all the quote unquote great movies have been made about men.
Yeah.
And I'm done with it. I'm done. Okay, so that's my only hot take. Do we have anything else?
I don't think so, but I do think we should at some point cover both Mad Max Fury Road and Spirited Away, because those are both great movies.
Okay, I will add those to the list. Okay, so that, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women and movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, or you can follow me on Threads at author.tess.adair. I don't post very often, but I do post occasionally, and most of it is very angry. If you would like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth.
And I am Beth Von Barron. You can sign up for my weekly Substack, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com, where I try to temper my anger with stories of joy and hope occasionally. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at stl_writer_Beth, and on Blue Sky at stlwriterbeth.bsky.social. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks.